Cool. Here we are once again. Um,
So,
yeah, Mark, you want to lead us in?
well, I pitched Matt. I told him, like, you and I have this convo. And Matt reminded me that I had said something a while ago, like, if we could get everybody in the Neyer family to agree or sign off on something, then that would have to have pretty broad-based appeal because we disagree on we disagree basically on a bunch of different things. And there's a pretty broad representation of American political perspectives in the room. And so Matt had a thesis he wanted to put out there.
All right. Yeah, so my thesis, and this was talking with Mark, again, backstory was, could we get our entire family to agree on one thing? And the solution I came to, at least with my family, is would we all agree that it was a good thing that America was founded with liberal principles? Or no, sorry, let me back up. It was a good thing that America was founded with liberal principles and is a good thing for America to continue having liberal principles. And now you could debate liberal, and I just say you can use the Wikipedia definition. I don't want to get too caught up in the all the nuances on that, but it's just getting an overall principle of, or is that a hard no for you?
So let's start by just like, how about you just define liberal just so that we have like coherence about what we're talking about?
For the most part, is basically the free exchange of ideas and I would even say property as well. It's basically people are self governed and they participate in a society. But you know what? Let me actually pull up the Wikipedia
I was
No,
definition.
gonna
I
say
think it's good. And
actual definition.
because to me, there's two different things. There's one is like, sweet, are founded on that. We might be able to like, I think like there's a nuance there of like, even if we were founded on that, how well have we practiced that? Even
Yeah,
at our
I would
founding, I
agree.
think like
We
to me,
haven't. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. We were founded on that, but we weren't very good at practicing it. Slavery, for a great example, where it's
yeah,
right, right.
I think of slavery, and I think of like our relationship with the Native Americans, and I think like there's like, yeah, free exchange of ideas for wealthy landowners, has white landowners has typically like been a thing. And I still see your point that like even beyond our shortcomings, there's a core intention of a free exchange of ideas that this country was founded on. Um, and even that, like we adopted a lot of our ideas of democracy from Native Americans, and so there's like something beautiful there that there's like, I mean, again, even if we've fallen short in it, there's this idea of a free exchange of ideas that Europeans had practiced a little bit, and Native Americans has also practiced a little bit, and that some weird synthesis has come about in our country. So I think that you said the other thing about like property ownership or around like there's like the self-governing, and I think there's something to get into a little bit about like whether self-governing in the sense that we've done it. I mean, I do think yes, we should be self-governing. Um, but there's like this connection to property ownership that's been like a dark point, I think, on our country.
That sounds
Here's
like
the
a thing
definition.
to explore. Um, I want to focus as much as possible on light and not heat. And so like try to it, understand where we differ rather than be like, hey, let's all, this thing is true. No, 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 that thing is true.
Yeah,
Um, so the idea of property rights, I think this would be a big thing because a lot of people would say that has nothing to do with liberalism. And
right,
other people would say, oh, that's at the core of liberalism. Without that, you don't actually have anything.
right. Yeah,
So how do you
which is funny that like the libertarians and the liberals, like there's the liber that's kind of like,
both of those come from the concept free, right? That's
okay,
like the word there is freedom. And then the question is like, well, what do you mean by freedom?
yeah,
And I'm of the opinion that a lot of our agreements are nonsense, where we don't actually agree. But if both of us agree that one word is good, we can pretend that we agree. And this ends up concealing more than it reveals. And it's better for us to be open and honest about what we do and don't agree on. And actually, you have to search for that. But what happens is language gets corrupted because words become rallying mechanisms for groups. And so people will say, like, we both agree that freedom is good, but we disagree on what freedom means or what is or isn't freedom. Then, like, why are we pretending that we agree?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better to like figure out the extent of our agreements or our disagreements?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I agree with that, but I also think I disagree at the same point where say, okay, well, we both agree free or liberty is important and valuable, then maybe we can better define it. How do we define liberty, and then come to it. Like, but if we have different perceptions of what that is,
Yeah, yes.
there's
Okay.
something about that we agree on.
I think that gets to the core of it. And then I think you ask me, why do people disagree on what liberty is? And I think what comes in almost right away is this notion of government. And people bring to the table different presuppositions about what government is, what government isn't. And then their conceptions of liberty differ because they're downstream of that. For some people, what they would say is liberty means that we, the people, are in charge. And they would say something like liberty means that we, the people, decide what happens. And to me, this is nonsense. This is
Yep.
like a kind of feel good slogan. And I would say that, well, that's a separate. You could start with examples like if you're enslaved, most people would say that being a slave is not being free. Okay. And then, like, well, why? What is it about that? And it's something like because someone's going to do violence on you if you don't do what they want. And so it's sort of like having an authority, having a boss over you is like feels unfree.
Hmm.
But I would look at this as the essence of freedom is your capacity to do what's good. And the reason that that feels free is like if you're walking a tightrope over a cliff, there's a long way you could fall down.
Hmm.
And the feeling of freedom is actually your perception of the enormous number of degrees of freedom you have for navigating the space. And
Yeah.
so I don't think there's any the reality to me, the reality of freedom is your capacity to choose what's right. And then people kind of get confused about what that means because like the reason being a slave would be awful would be you'd have this disconnect between what you want, what you're convinced is right, and then fear would be preventing you, fear of being punished would be getting in the way of that.
Mm.
So I look at freedom as really all freedom comes down to freedom from internal conflict. And you can imagine someone who is actively enslaved, but they're happier than someone who's like, I've got all the money I need, but I'm internally miserable because nothing means anything. Whereas the guy who's enslaved is like, well, I guess this is where life has me now. And I could be good to the people around me. And so, yes, the chains are around me, but I choose to accept them as like, this is what it is. There's a real sense in which the guy that's at peace with his situation is more free than the guy that's like, I could do whatever I want, but nothing matters. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I like kind of where this is around, which is like, okay, there's a desire to kind of like find where the agreement and the coherence is in this. And it sounds like there's like enough of like, yes, freedom is good, but we mean different things by freedom. And so then there's the orientation of like, what does freedom actually mean? And now it's like there's okay, a discussion of like what does freedom mean? And I think I see some of this similar to you, Mark, which is like in some ways, the somebody who is enslaved can in many ways be more free than the person who's enslaving them. And I think like there's a lot of like people who had lived in slavery who would have like said that. It's like that they found their freedom within the context, like within their
yeah,
confines.
now that I'm on the other side of hearing it, I'm hemming and hawing about this. Like, that's kind of missing. Like, because then you could be like, all right, what if we just enslaved everybody with the right set of drugs and protocols and convince them all to accept their slavery? That would be setting them free. And I'm going to oppose that on principle and say that, yeah, freedom is also this material condition too, where like the guy that could be happy in a state of enslavement, that's a kind of enormous spiritual achievement.
Totally.
But like there is something to be said for
All
I'm
right,
I'm pausing because
But,
I
but
realize
I,
that
I think
thoughts
what
have
we're
to
getting, I think what we're
how about
both
this? Freedom before the law itself. is the state that you're participating in. There's equality in the law itself between the two individuals.
But that's a separate, equality is a separate concept from freedom, right? Or are they really? Because in the American mind, these things are all related. It's like, those are all good words. But
Yeah.
I think this is all, it ends up being nonsense.
But I
Well,
think what
I would see equality. Sorry, I see equality as a proponent of liberalism,
and
where
I think what we're all kind of getting at here is there's two different levels of freedom. There is the like external manifestation, but then there's like the internal freedom. And I think what like Mark, you and I are like trying to point at is like freedom in the way that we're starting to use it here has more to do with one's internal state of being than it does with external circumstances. But I think
Okay,
what
maybe
Matt's
I'll
pointing out is
summarize
like
it.
the external circumstances still matter, and like how do we define freedom at
Okay,
that?
right. Yeah. So this, I would say your external circumstances matter, and they matter largely because of the effect that they have on you internally. But
my point, I guess, would be like liberalism itself came as part of a society coming together, and so you have to look at the external, like internally, like for someone to have that. I mean, to me, that's awesome, but it actually doesn't matter as much as far as if you're having people organize and work together, cooperate in society. There has to be kind of that foundation, and that's where I would say the liberalism or the equality becomes important. Where it's like, hey, you're not treating that person the way like we basically agreed the society is supposed to be founded on. And then that's where it becomes an issue is basically, okay, this is the principle we're going to follow to participate in this society.
okay, so I'm gonna try and restate that just to make sure I heard it. Yeah, this internal stuff is nice and all, but when we talk about the law, we're talking about a mechanism by which multiple groups of people cooperate and work together. And that mechanism matters. And if that mechanism has the same rules applying to everyone, then that creates a condition. Like if the same rules apply to everybody, then like I don't want to be enslaved, so I'm not going to enslave other people. And then those two things go together effectively,
I mean,
right?
I
Is it?
mean, I guess it also be someone could even be like, you know what, I want to have this person make all my decisions for me, but it's kind of like, and in fact, I'm in or sorry, I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase it, but basically, it's like that should be the starting point, where it's like, oh, hey, like because I think in many ways, I think some people give up their rights voluntarily. And it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. But it's like if that becomes their decision to do so, or if they want to say, hey, in this group, I'm going to leave decisions to him because I trust his opinion better than mine, or something along
Yeah.
those lines.
So one of the things that like I often sometimes get like stuck on in some of these is like the concept of equality. Because I think equality can also be this thing that is kind of ignoring differences that are also like there's a need to root in the sameness, but also our differences matter. And so like how do we like I hear a lot of people talk about like equality is different from equity. Like equality is giving everybody the same bike. Equity is giving people the bike that they most need. And so there's like, but I think what we do probably want to be orienting, there is some things where equality matters, and everywhere it seems like fairness matters. And so how do we, and it's just like, but fairness becomes a little more subjective. It's easier to like objectively say equal, whereas like fairness, it like is a little harder to like figure out quite what is fair in any given circumstance.
In both these cases, we're talking about something like a social operating system, right?
Mhm.
And I think it's a fine way of looking at it, but none of this makes any sense without addressing the question of violence because you like it doesn't matter how great your system is. If somebody's like, no, I don't care, I'm gonna shoot you. Like you can't, it does no amount of your ideas are gonna overcome somebody else who's more than willing to use violence to deploy their conception of what good means. And so I think unless you can get to that layer of the stack, what you're continuously doing is like tinkering around inside an operating system you don't understand. And the actual social operating system isn't socially constructed. It's things like I don't want to die. I don't want my kids to die. I want my kids to be healthy. And then all these other things go downstream of that. And I think the last couple hundred years of human civilization have been this almost like retreat into fantasy world where we imagine something like society is a computer and the laws are the computer, the code that operates the computer. And that's just not true. that no amount of talking about ideas matters if I can't force somebody to go along with my ideas. And people don't like that any more than like people who enjoy hot dogs don't tend to like seeing how the hot dogs are made. And so until we bring up this question of like, what is the socially sanctioned use of violence? All the talk about, oh, this is good and that's good, to me is like, it's nonsense. It doesn't mean anything because who cares what I think is good if I don't have the ability to influence the world coming out of that? And that to me, this all being covered up ends up being like, oh, that's super important because you can't get to the truth if you're not willing to look at that.
Sorry, cover it up.
Yeah, I missed that last what you were
The
pointing at there.
relationship between laws and violence, and the fact that laws are dependent on violence, they need violence to work, they only work with violence, and if you can't exert violent force, your laws mean nothing. People like to ignore this, but to me, that's like the central organizing fact that should be upstream of anything political. Is like, there's no point in talking about like our society and our norms if you can't enforce them. It means nothing.
That in order to be able to enforce, like we create laws to like try to stop people from being violent, but we can't enforce our laws without also
First
exercising
of all, I
some
say no,
degree
we
of
don't
violence.
create laws to stop people from being violent. We create laws to enforce norms.
But I think one of the norms that we typically want to enforce is like people not harming each other. Like that is, I think, one of the most fundamental things we
Yeah,
probably
okay.
want
So
to
now I'm gonna come back on this. When we talk about harm and we say, oh, it is a good thing that America was founded on liberal, but what do you mean by good?
Oh, I would say it's been good for, I guess,
I'm not trying to troll here. To me, this
no,
is
no,
like,
no. I'm trying to think of. I mean,
Let
there's
him finish.
multiple ways you can't quantify good, and in many ways, I would say choose which good you want to talk about. And I would say it's probably been good for America if you want to talk about human development, flourishing, technology, the average lifespan is the fact that basically America became a superpower and basically lifted up the rest of the world, increased the per capita for again worldwide, and like children dying at early ages is no longer a thing anymore.
I
So
mean, there's an argument that to be made that like globalism and capitalism has uplifted the world, but there's also a very solid argument to be made that has caused tremendous destruction, inequity. It caused a lot of new suffering. And I think both of those are true, and we're always weighing like, does one of those look more than the other? And I think when we say it's good and you say it's good for America, it's like, what are we defining as America? Are we defining America as like citizen, like people who are legal citizens of this nation? Or are we defining America as like the whole people, but also all the animals and all the plants and the land and everything? Because if we look for that, the biodiversity health of this land has suffered tremendously from the founding of this country. And like I think that has to be held in the conversation too.
I dig all that, but I don't think at some point our conversation itself becomes nonsense if we don't have a shared conception of what good means.
Hmm.
There's no point talking about what is or isn't good unless we have some agreement on what good, like what are we even talking about when we talk about good? And most people roll their eyes or leave the conversation at this point. But to me, this is like, no, this is the bedrock.
Hmm.
And the fact that there's not agreement on what good means is like, well, there's no way you're going to have anything but political chaos and conflict and fallout if we can't be like, oh, here's what good means.
Hmm.
Maybe we don't have to be able to put it in words, but like, is good real or is it just subjective and whatever we decide is good is good?
To me, like goodness points to harmony and points to like net benefit for the whole. And to understand the whole, we need to understand that the whole is part of the greater wholes. And so like
I say
we
net
could,
benefit though. This is kind of it's a tautology, right? You're saying that which is good is that which is on net good.
yeah, but I think the important thing there is pointing towards the whole. Um, like
I
it's
agree.
like
Okay, so I agree
there's
with
this.
the idea. Goodness points towards the whole.
Yeah, exactly. Points towards the whole and harmonious, like towards the whole being harmonious, but like not just with itself, but within like the wider world. Like it's not, I don't think something's really good if it's like it's good for me, but it's like then like,
I mean,
but it's
but
causing suffering all around me. I don't think that's genuine goodness.
is good an objective property of reality, Or is it just like, well, I like this and you like that, and it's a feeling that I have and you have, and if we add up our feelings in a spreadsheet, then that tells us overall what's good.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you're pointing at is that it's a hard thing to define. Like goodness is hard to define, and it's like it
So
seems
I don't
subjective.
think it's a question of definition. Like we used to have a definition for a couple thousand years that that which was good was in alignment with the will of God. Or you'd phrase this today as something like it'd be congruent with what they said was natural order.
Which I think, and I think that's like actually reasonable, and I think that's pointing the same thing that I'm pointing at with like harmony for the
Yeah, no,
whole.
I don't think we're that far.
Yeah,
But when you say if goodness is real, that means something very different because then it implies that your feelings could be wrong. That a
well,
person could feel something is good and they could be confused or wrong about that.
100%.
But so if it's real, how come we can't measure it? Or can we measure it?
I mean, I think our ways of measuring things have been very limited because the ways we've learned to measure things in this society is by dividing things up. And measuring by dividing things up doesn't work if what we're trying to point at is the whole,
What
the
about Matt? So
indivisible.
Matt brings up infant mortality. That seems like a pretty good. Um, if I take off my like, I'm going to be rigorous hat and put on my like words mean what they mean, obviously hat. Like, yeah, kids dying is not good. Kids dying before the age of 5, having that number go down seems like a pretty good indicator of like, okay, hey, that's good.
Yes, it does. And if we need to like factor like that what's happening is not only infant mortality going down, what's
Yes,
happening is that going down and everything else also happening. And so
yes.
we can't take
Okay,
infant
right,
mortality and divide it out because then we're actually
right.
disconnecting from the whole.
I would buy that completely. But then if you have this other thing of like, say we weigh down infant mortality versus biodiversity, how do you combine those two numbers together? Like, suppose we could just have some number, I don't know how many species there are. How do you combine those two numbers when they reflect such totally different things?
I mean, I think again we're at the problem of we're trying to like measure the benefit of the whole by taking all of the component parts and gluing them together. And now we've
Okay.
divided things up and we're trying to glue them back together. And
All
like I
right.
think goodness speaks to the indivisibility of the whole. And I think there's like a way we need to return back to that to ascertain goodness from a more holistic perspective. Not
Well,
just saying we're gonna add this and this.
I guess at that point, are you saying that like, we really can't measure it? Or I guess that point, like, how do we even define if you say, okay, we're going to stick to natural order, and then, but if we can't really like measure, because measuring the whole would basically be, to me, an impossible task. It's not something we could actually even come
I
close
mean,
to
I think
measure.
we need to orient towards ways of knowing that are not the ways we've learned in Western science. Like there are other ways of knowing, and if we look at really good modern science, it's pointing to other ways of knowing, but also we like look at ancient wisdom traditions and like indigenous traditions, like there are ways of knowing that are different from like dividing everything up and measuring it. And I think like that's how we need to be orienting to like
You give an example of what? So
um
I hear this. I gotta be honest, my bullshit detector goes off.
totally.
It's like,
Yeah, I mean,
So,
even just speaking, and I was like, okay, this is getting a little like woo.
well,
Um,
so my big thing, sorry, was just like, okay, like I'm I'm not even opposed to that in principle, but my main thought was like I'd be curious to see how that society like basically met like compare it like almost like if you had like state A and state B doing two different methods, could we see the result in each state and see? But then is that me dividing it? And that's where it's like it's to me it's almost like unfalsifiable. Where it's like could I even like even say oh it's not going to work or is it? Yeah, okay, that's all right. You go
yeah.
ahead.
So I'm gonna do my best to answer this, and I'm probably gonna fall into some woo, and so we're just gonna go where it's gonna go. But like to me, it's like there is a way of making sense, and I think if we look at like a lot of indigenous cultures, what they're doing is they're not like going and creating a spreadsheet of like this. What they're doing is they're coming together in a council, and they're saying like, here's what I see, and here's what I see, and here's what I see.
Yeah,
And usually through a bunch of people sharing their perspectives,
yeah,
like then we get a sense for like what the
yes,
impacts of these things are. And
yeah,
then usually I think there's like a collective sense making that emerges where we can point and be like, okay, this seems good. This seems good
yeah,
because enough of us are making sense of it together. And each of us has like our subjective sense of goodness, and that's like can like fallible or whatever.
I dig it.
But
Okay.
because enough of us are doing it together, then we can usually have a pretty good sense of like, okay, this seems good,
All
and
right.
there's
So
enough of us we trust.
I like it. I'm gonna spin it back to you with my own spin on it, but like I'm trying to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying.
Yeah.
Uh, when you chop everything up into little bits and try to measure it, you're approaching the world through a specific lens, and you're really performing a certain kind of computational process.
Hmm.
When you have something like 50 people get together, they all say what they think is important or it matters. Everyone hears everyone else. What's happening there is you're transmitting a certain kind of information, namely about people's subjective value preferences. But if our subjective preferences are noisy approximations of what's actually good, if each of us has some vague approximation of what the good is, then you should expect groups of us coming together and exchanging that information. It should computationally converge. Have
I
I lost you?
Yeah, just for a second. I heard you say it should computationally converge. Was that the last?
The idea is that if a group of us get together and share our experiences and how we see things and the values that we have, that process is a computational process that leads to a consensus which converges on something which is a better approximation of good than any of the individuals in the group could have come up with on their own.
Yeah, that feels like a pretty accurate read of what I'm saying.
Okay, so the problem with this is that all of us could get into a room and be like, I really don't like minority group X. And then everybody else in the room is like, yeah, I also hate those people. Let's kill them. And that can, it does happen.
Yes,
It's
which is where I think a necessary ingredient to this is having like inclusion as a core value. And because to me, it's like if we're trying to
okay.
orient towards the
Okay.
whole includes everything. Like there's
All right. So
nothing.
we can basically look at that one and be like, hey, that's a good case in point that when you select the group and say only this group gets to say what they think is good, you're not doing a uniform random sample that's been uniformly distributed around approximations of what true good is. And so you shouldn't expect that model to converge. If you could like pull everybody in the world, you're going to get the most uniform distribution about, okay, but again, is
Yeah.
that
So we're gonna have a group of 50 people, and we're probably gonna converge eventually. It's gonna be a process, but we're gonna converge around what these 50 people care about. Like there's gonna be enough of
okay?
our personal cares reflected in that. But if we continue to like widen the circles to be like, okay, but we're and I think this is where like there's a necessity to understand wholeness, to understand ourselves as part of a greater whole, because then we're gonna be like, okay, what is the whole that we're a part of? And are we including
Okay,
the
so
that wider whole in
yeah,
that?
that last part I think is super tricky to get right because I suspect that one of the things that happens when people get around and do this is they're updating based on what's popular, what can I say without losing standing in the group, and so I think that consensus mechanism has all of its own failure modes that I don't
So
think it,
here's where I think it has succeeded well. And again, I'm going to like return back to like indigenous cultures have done it. And I think the
okay.
reason indigenous cultures have done it is because there are elders in those culture who are taking a wider perspective. Like they have lived experience which leads them to have a wider perspective and like include more. And those cultures have trust and respect for those elders. And so
Yes,
when there is a sense-making process and there is respect for those who are known to have a bigger, like wider, more inclusive perspective, then I
yeah.
think that helps the sense making process not get trapped in the like small little like popularity contests and like we don't like those people because it has respect for the bigger.
Because
How much?
that was, go ahead.
I'll say how much, and maybe me redefining it. Would you say is that on tradition? The value of tradition in that the wholeness. Would you say?
Um, how much? Sorry, can you say that question again?
Let me try to rephrase it. Like basically, I was in my mind, I was kind of thinking almost playing like elders. I was actually comparing to like our family with like grandpa, and I think of like many ways what we did, we came together was all like kind of tradition that was kind of carried on, and it kind of that was like the shared the value that was passed down. And so, and then when I think of more I don't know much about indigenous cultures, And so I was thinking in more of like the Western mind is almost tradition that gets passed down from the elders to the next generation, and that kind of goes on. And so I guess that's my way of trying to make sure I understood fully.
Yeah, and I think like there is an issue with, and I think if you do these, we tend to respect the elders, and the elders are holding a certain tradition, um, and so like there's going to be a limitation of this. Like if we're respecting elders, we're gonna get to the place where it's like okay, we've got a wider perspective, but that wider perspective is still probably not fully inclusive. Like especially if we're looking at like American culture, it's like it's a certain traditional way of doing things. And even like in indigenous cultures, where I think they did a lot better job of taking the whole land ecosystem, everything into account. They're still like if you're going into councils there, it's like they still have a traditional way of doing things like that. The traditional elders there are probably gonna dislike a variety of things, which might exclude some things there. And so it's like not necessarily saying that the elders are perfect in any one of these traditions, but
Mm-hmm.
that through the lived experience of becoming an elder, there's typically what you've cultivated is a wider perspective. And I think what we can, I think we need to let go of the idea that we need to aspire towards the perfect, all-inclusive perspective. And we need to instead orient towards just like increasing, like having more inclusive, wider perspectives. And I think if we have a wider perspective, even if it's limited by our own traditions, that wider perspective is probably going to make it easier to then come together with other like groups who are like making sense of things. And then from there, it's like, okay, sweet. Like we've made a sense of our things, but you've made sense of things differently. And like we have enough overlap that we see things. And now it's just like, okay, now let's orient around that. So again, there's not a perfect elder we need to respect, but elders help us to keep a bigger perspective into it.
Okay,
That's
so
kind
that,
of how I
that
see it.
makes
So, just really quick, going back to, would you say, so in many ways, everything you just said, in my mind, can continue as going back to the original statement. It would be good for us to continue in a liberalism society because to me, all that seems to fit
Free
within a
free exchange
liberal
of ideas.
society.
I think free exchange of
Yeah.
ideas is incredibly important.
all right. So I would try and put a little spin on it now. This pattern of, hey, we'll listen to each other, we'll come together in groups, there'll be a consensus about the group based on this exchange of information. I think what you're describing it hasn't just been indigenous cultures that have done it. This is also like how most religions formed and worked for a very long time. And then like, okay, I could go like a bunch of different religious traditions have converged on these very different perspectives, but they're also quite similar. Like depending on how you look at it, right? You could either be like, oh, they're all so different from each other, or you could be like, oh, basically every wisdom tradition says certain things about the primacy of love, about the importance of truth, about a bunch of other these pieces. How does that tie into does this not work in politics because no one's doing it?
Um, I think I think it's not happening enough in politics. And I think politics has fallen into the trap that most religions also fall into, but it's fallen into like at a deeper level, which is like there's a valuing of getting more diverse perspectives, but there's also a trap we fall into of needing to have the right perspective. And
So I think we have, in some sense, a lot less diversity of perspective than we had 50 years ago.
totally.
And that, but I would say this has come about from people saying they were championing diversity.
I mean, that's part of it. Then,
This is
and
like where it
because
starts.
because the idea, this is like one of the traps that I think a lot of like liberals fall into is like we recognize that diversity is value and we need a free exchange of ideas. Therefore, we've then leapt to say anybody who doesn't like our idea of diversity is excluded, which is actually
Yeah,
failing the thing of like
right.
including more diverse perspectives.
I think that came from the idea that no one's conception of value can be superior to anyone else's.
Sure, sure. And there's a recognition here that hierarchy is limited. But then what happens is hierarchy becomes we create a hierarchy of no hierarchy. And so it's
Yeah,
like
no, that sounds exactly like okay, because when you describe these things like consensus groups, et cetera, that sounds great to me. I don't think this was doable in the past on a global scale because there was no internet.
yeah.
And then in the absence of the internet, you run into this problem where, like, say the Pope and the leading Muslim cleric, and they could get into the same room and talk. Well, they were busy fighting wars with each other over territory,
Totally.
right? And each one was basically like, my perspective has to dominate. Um, so how do you not have, like, if there's a consensus group and each of us is connected to this idea that there is a truth that's beyond me, okay. But I bet if you had 1,000 people doing this and you had 50 of them who are like, let's make the lizard people thing real, and they just kept pushing every meeting, like, no, I swear the world is run by lizard people. I think all it would take is like a really small group, super dedicated to advancing that proposition, and they would just keep winning.
I'm not convinced that would actually happen because I think
You think
what
people would find out you guys are pushing nonsense and we kick you out?
because if we're orienting towards like discovering truth, to me it's like I think that there's a more open way of orienting towards truth. I think that like there's a certainty that we've been like led in the West of like I just need to have my viewpoint and convince everybody that it's right. Whereas like to me it's like if you're really understanding truth, then you're immediately suspicious of anybody who's trying to convince you of something. Like because
Why
if they're
would that
trying to convince
necessarily
you of
follow?
something, they're trying to prove something. And
But
it's like
why would that? I don't disagree, but we'll connect the dots for me, please.
um the phrase I often return to is that um like truth does not need to validate itself, whereas belief requires constant validation. And so belief is like creating an image of the truth, and then it's like this thing that we hold on to for like our need for security. And it's like
Uh,
we need everybody to believe what we believe because it's our sense of security. Whereas like truth is just what is, and it's like all the other stuff can fall away and truth is still here.
if that were true, I would expect that you never had to argue against falsehoods,
I don't think we
but
do need
you
to
do
argue
have to
against
argue against
falsehoods.
falsehoods because, huh?
I don't think we do need to argue against falsehoods. I think arguing against falsehoods is usually a waste of energy. Maybe not always, but most of the time, I think arguing against falsehoods is a waste of energy.
Why is that?
Because like what does it actually like what purpose does it serve?
If people are actively being misled and nobody stands up and says that's not true, a bunch of kids are going to follow along with the terrible advice.
But I'm not saying that's not true. I'll say that's not true, but if they start arguing, I'll be like, cool, believe what you want to believe.
Well, I guess I come back to, if one small group makes it their goal to try to influence what everybody thinks, and the people who are not, like, who think truth means something and has the properties you think it does, if they're not putting energy into it at the same rate, why would
But
that
we
small
we
group try?
do need to put energy into it. We do need to put
Okay, so
energy
your
into the
point is putting
proliferation of
energy
truth.
into the same
But
thing as arguing.
yeah, the way we put energy into the proliferation of truth is not through arguing with the ignorant.
Well, okay, but what
Like
about,
like
like,
Jesus said, don't throw pearls before swine. What he's saying is like if people are like caught up in like their like ignorance, like
yeah?
don't try and throw them truth. Like they're not gonna be
I
able to pick it
agree
up.
one on
So
one, but
go and
like,
share truth with those who are
okay,
willing to listen. And
I
like
agree
from
that
that
in
it
a one on
grows.
one conversation that gets you nowhere. Um, Okay, so I'm going to try and, to what extent are we actually agreeing or disagreeing? I agree with this idea of like arguing with one person is usually a complete waste of time. But debating something in public is different because there could be an audience. The audience can perceive what you're saying. They and like that. Do you
Yeah,
think that could
there
be a way
there
of
could
spreading
be
truth or not?
there could be some purpose to public debate, and I'm not saying arguing
Uh-huh.
against falsehoods is always wrong. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is it's usually not a good use of effort.
Okay, but there's
I
there's a
think that where
presupposition.
where arguing and debate is a good thing is if we can have a debate with two people who are actually debating in good faith,
Okay, so I
who are both genuinely interested in understanding.
so
That's where
there,
I
there
think debate can be useful.
there's something to what you're saying that I think is like, I want to unpack it more because I'm pretty sure I agree with it, but I haven't heard people talk about it. What you're saying is beliefs are these things that you have in your brain. You're just trying to survive, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sure. And then you're saying truth is what is.
Mhm.
Okay, yes, we're in agreement on that. And then you say something like the truth doesn't need you to defend it. Is that the right?
Truth doesn't need to validate itself.
So truth doesn't need to validate itself. Maybe I ask a different question. is it prudent or reasonable to fear that the truth could be suffocated by lies? Or is that fear fundamentally unfounded?
I don't think we need to fear that the truth will be suffocated by lies, but we
Okay.
may need to fear that humanity will destroy itself because it has become increasingly out of touch with truth.
Well,
Okay.
so that's my next point is in many ways it seems like the society itself needs to be truth seeking. Like that itself should be a value that society needs to have, or else it would get can get
Well,
wayside if it doesn't care about being
I I
truth
would
seeking.
push it further and say that you have to put the truth so far above everything else. And there has to be agreement that the truth is far more important than anything else because the moment something becomes more important than the truth, because truth is one, it's a whole object. The moment anything becomes more important than the truth on any one topic or any one area, people will start telling, spreading, and believing lies to advance whatever goal they've made more important than the truth. And so I don't like all this liberalism is like, hey, that's great, but I think that's downstream of to what extent do people actually believe truth is the most important thing? And I think at some level that's kind of a crazy thing because you'd have to believe that like believing the truth is more important than feeding my kids or not getting shot or and like that sounds crazy when you put it that way. So how do you juggle those two?
I
Well,
mean, I do think that a society should generally be oriented towards truth, towards seeking understanding truth.
Generally,
Um,
or like that's very important because that's gonna be a big difference.
I think yeah, I think it is important that a society is oriented towards truth. And I think we need to look at what a society that's oriented towards truth is. Because it's like some people will hear that and be like, we should just have intellectual debates all the time to really get to it. Whereas, like, the truth is also, I think, a lived experience. And the truth involves caring for people. And I think a lot of the truth is revealed in a lot of what we've come to define as liberal democracy. I do think we need to soften around the idea of liberal democracy as the inherently right structure. But I think we need to recognize that our caring about truth is actually part of what has led to the current manifestation of our society.
Well, no, I see this as completely key. That what
Mhm.
Christianity did was personify truth and be like that specific guy called himself the truth. He also said he was God. And so we're gonna like you can see this on the entrance to the cathedral in New York. It says the truth above all things. And I think we've lost that. And the reason we've lost that is that only makes sense if you trust the truth fully and completely.
Mhm.
If you don't trust the truth fully and completely, then it would be foolish to put it above yourself.
Sure. But we need to make sure we don't like fall into the trap of Christianity, which is that the truth is inseparable from our image of this dude who lived
I
2000 years.
think you want to make sure that you're separating the map from the territory. And the moment you think your map is the territory, you've gotten lost and confused. I
Exactly.
100% agree with that. But without specifically this idea that if you don't think the truth is fundamentally good, if you don't think reality is fundamentally good, you can't trust the truth. It would be irrational to trust the truth. Why would you do that?
Um, because I think that's still a self-centered viewpoint that is like I should only trust the truth because the truth is good. Whereas it's just
Yeah,
like
that's like what we
because
evolved
what
for,
I'm
right?
what I'm talking about is not trusting the truth. What I'm talking about is caring about what is actually true.
But why would you care about what was true if you didn't fundamentally trust that the truth was going to be okay for you? Like, what if the fundamental truth is that I'm just a piece of shit, that I don't deserve to be happy, and that it would be better for everyone for me to so what if that's the truth?
Isn't this where we've like fallen off the boat in so many ways? Is because the truth of life is that I'm gonna die. That everything points towards like my mortality as a living being,
Okay, yeah, that's
and
that's
we
that's
don't like that truth, and so then we deny everything that is true
okay, but
because
you
I
could
don't I
also be
don't
like,
like
I'm gonna
it's
die,
because it's
so
not
nothing
okay for
I
me.
do really matters. So I might as well go out, have a good time, and like maybe if some people get hurt, like what I
Hey,
this
yeah,
idea.
sorry. I have to get going, but it looks like the person I'm supposed to be in the meeting with may not be there, so I may jump back on
They
if they're
just
still talking.
disappear randomly. So I think there's some meat here. I want to try and figure this out. I think, Aaron,
Yes,
what you're
Matt.
saying is
Yeah, I hope to see you back here in a minute. We'll be here for a few more
the
minutes.
idea of trusting the truth is the fact that you're going to die, people like avoid that, and then they turn away from a bunch of other aspects of the truth on account of not wanting to consider the reality that they're going to die.
Yeah, I think the truth is one whole, and we tend to find something about the truth that we don't like. Usually, it's our
Yes,
mortality,
yes.
and
Okay,
then we deny the truth because the truth
okay.
is one
So
whole.
this is what
You
I
can't
would
deny
say
part of
that
the truth without denying the whole truth.
that's what I think is meant by sin. And I don't want to be like that's the only way to talk about it, but this concept that we have a natural inbuilt or like whatever, we are predisposed to turn away from reality. I think you end up needing that concept to make sense of reality. Like that's like to me, that's a core part of the truth. And a lot of people I think don't have that or don't want to believe that that's there.
That a lot of people don't have what? Sorry, say that again. What was
They
it?
don't believe that there's people have an intrinsic tendency to turn away from the truth.
Intrinsic, I think, is worth questioning.
The word is fine, but
We're
like
definitely
basically
conditioned
the idea that
towards it. We're conditioned towards
well,
turning
so
away
this is the
from
thing.
truth.
I don't think that's conditioned. I think that's a natural. It makes sense evolutionarily why that would be there.
Perhaps. Again, like
Well, again, like what would be
I don't want to
evolutionary?
express certainty on one way or another, but I'm
Sure.
just like I think that is one worth examining that might take a little bit longer, whether our tendency to turn away from the truth is conditioning or intrinsic. And again, I'm not arguing for one viewpoint, but I just want to like say that I would leave that
Yeah.
question open.
So, I think there's a pattern that a lot of people will claim things are conditioned. And I think the reason they claim things to be conditioned is that there's a real sense in which that's comforting because you could possibly control it. And it's also an argument for social control. So, one thing I think you're never going to have in a consensus group, the consensus group is never going to convince themselves that they've gone crazy. It's never going to happen. The consensus group is always going to convince themselves that their consensus is valid. And so what I would expect is these consensus groups, if they get too like isolated from their intellectual environment, they will drift off to crazy land. And you can see this empirically throughout history. Any group, the moment it becomes like, I don't need, we know what the truth is, I don't need to hear it. It doesn't matter how they started, they always end up crazy.
So
And to me,
here's
this
like
is like,
my
it can't be
argument a
socially
little bit for
conditioned.
why I think that it might be more
What?
conditioned. My argument for why I think it might be a little bit more conditioned is because if we look historically, we turn away from truth more now than we ever have. And so to me, that has to point to
How would
at
you?
least some element of it is conditioned,
Well, people socially encourage it for sure, but I
which is
don't
what
know.
conditioning is. That's we are socially conditioned.
But social conditioning can run on top of, or it can run against biological programming.
Totally. Which means it seems like there's an agreement that we're conditioned to turn away from truth. And you're positing that you think it's also something intrinsic. And I
Yeah,
feel
no, I
worried
think.
about that.
Well, I think that it not only is intrinsic, but like the way I would look at this is, unless you're putting everything into aligning with the truth, you're failing terribly at it. And if you put everything into it, you're still failing terribly at it. But you realize like nothing I can do is going to solve this problem. It is beyond me.
Hmm.
And maybe this like this idea of a consensus group. Uh, I think that is a useful computational technique for exchanging and processing information, but all computational techniques ultimately fail. So the way I look at this is like nothing I can do is going to stop me from descending in a delusion. And my only option is to be like, I trust that ultimately the truth will keep revealing itself to me if I make this consistent practice every day of like, I know I'm being a fool. I know I'm at least being a fool about these five things, but I trust you. I'm open that you're going to guide me. If I just like try to trust that you're pointing me in some direction, and I really try to center the fact, instead of using the phrase "I'm a piece of shit," I'm going to center the fact that I am so prone to self-delusion on so many levels, and I don't see a way out of that because all of our thinking is model based.
So what I hear in this is that like you as a human being have come to an honesty that few rarely do, which
Please
is
don't.
that like you like everything like so much in you tends to orient away from truth, and that you then use your belief in this higher power as a very useful psychotechnology to help humble you so that you can orient. And I think that is
Well,
like
I think I would. The way I see this my mind has to be a bunch of different little versions of me. And I don't see any other way for that to work because, like, if you just look at it computationally, you have to have one program trying to keep you fed, another program trying to keep you safe, another program. Da, 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 da. Now, maybe there's a way you could fit all those programs together. The only way that would work is if there was a single good that unified all those, and you could trust that that single good actually met all your needs.
Totally.
And that's kind of a crazy hypothesis.
Yeah, but to me, it's like I think we can do that by recognizing something fundamental in us as human beings that speaks to what our true nature is. And I orient towards that. I think some people prefer to orient towards it as a higher power separate from them. And it's just like, a different way of orienting.
Well, what I'm trying to describe is the word reality. And so I guess that's the real to what extent are we actually disagreeing here? Because I'm bristling at the use of the word higher power because that has a bunch of cultural baggage. And it's not that I don't believe that so much as like I'm trying to intentionally cultivate a specific kind of relationship to reality so that my ideas and beliefs and thinking is constantly subservient to what reality actually points. I guess, do you think reality points?
Um, Maybe. I mean, like reality is. I think reality is.
Okay.
I think we point towards reality.
Oh,
Um,
this is where I say I think, yeah, reality absolutely points from the past to the future.
yeah, there's a directionality to reality. I think that there's a
Okay,
directionality.
so that, like if you ask me how do I define good, is like I would just come back and be like, goodness is an approximation of that which is going to persist indefinitely. And I think that the only way to survive over an indefinite time period in this universe, because it's unpredictable and it's entropic and it's bio and all this stuff, it has to be love. The only way you could survive is if you are loved by a whole network of things that are so different from you that when you inevitably kick it, because the cosmic dice has to keep getting flipped. The only possible way a system could like expect to exist over arbitrary time horizons is if something that wasn't you, that loved you, turned you back on. And you can almost like prove this empirically, like mathematically. I think that's crazy, but I think that is true.
Yeah, I mean, I think where we like definitely line up is like there's a need to recognize that which is beyond all of our ideas, beyond all of our conceptions, that
Yeah, yeah. And then
there's
what
like
people
that
keep
which
wanting to do is
fundamentally
be like,
is, and maybe we want to call that love, maybe we want to call it truth, maybe we don't want to call it anything at all.
yeah,
But I think that there is like immense value that comes from like being in relationship with that.
I think that's the source of all value. That anyway, that dude, I was hoping we could find something we disagreed on, but in a way that was like more. Oh, Matt has returned. Yo,
Nice.
Oh
so
yeah.
I think Aaron and I were basically agreeing with the same language, but I need to stop and go back and think about this more precisely. So I think that if we're converging on something, it's that ultimately individual's relationship with what is, whatever you want to call it reality, call it the universe, whatever, call it God. It's individual's relationship with that. Well, I'm saying this, I don't know if you agree or not, because to me, it's like nothing matters at the collective level if individually people aren't in the right space with respect to what is, with respect to God, with respect to being, whatever you want to call that. And then the flip side is the more individuals are at that right place, the more communities can be at that right place. And I think that has to go bottom up. It can't, I don't think that comes top down.
Totally.
Because like
Yeah, I
all
think
the
I think we've
culture,
tried it top down with religions for a while, and it's like it hasn't quite worked. And so there does need to be, I see, some like bottom up movement that reorients our relationship to what is.
okay. And then do I disagree? No, I think I think that's whatever's coming from top down. People always confuse social conformity with what is. What do you think of that, Clem? That conformance to the norms of a society is always going to be the primary temptation. Is like if you're going to replace what is with something, I think it's usually going to be whatever collective delusion we've centered on.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with any of this.
But what do you think of that, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I'm hearing, kind of my own digesting of that is like, um, we we tend to default back to like belief systems and structures of reality that are more easily graspable, um, because of the difficulty and complexity and like I think it takes a lot to really be in direct relationship with the truth. And I think that we tend to orient towards things that are easier, and so we tend to orient towards like
Do you think
I,
that's escapable?
it is. I mean,
Or is
I
that
think
like, is it necessary for most people to be living in some kind of approximation, some kind of consensus hallucination?
necessary. I think it's reasonable. I think it is very reasonable that
Hmm.
people are using approximations of reality to cope with a very uncertain universe. I think it is very reasonable. And I think it is also a beautiful thing for us to aspire to not need those structures as much and to orient towards a more direct relationship with.
Okay, so this is a big point of disagreement there, I think. Because what I would say is if you aspire to not needing the structures, I think you end up with tyranny. I think that trying to abolish structures under
Uh,
this
but but
idea,
but I didn't say that. I did not say trying to abolish structures.
okay,
I'm saying that I think it's a beautiful thing as an individual to aspire towards like orienting directly to what is true, in a way that requires us to need less of the structure. Like again, the structures can serve a purpose, and there's nothing wrong with the structure. I'm not saying we should try to destroy those. I'm saying
yeah.
I find there to be something really beautiful about moving towards a more direct relationship to what's true.
But I think that's true, right? I would agree with that part. If I don't see how you have a social operating system without some kind of shared conceptual structure.
Yeah,
To tie this all back to like individually, I can sit and meditate and pray all day long, get myself to a place where like I think I understand roughly the extent of my own foolishness and dependence on being, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, like you have to decide, right? Or I mean, like decisions have to be made. Like, where does the budget money go? Who's allowed in the room? That kind of thing.
Have you ever had like relationships where it feels like there's such an understanding between you and another that you don't need social norms, that you can just fully be and trust in the relationship?
Uh, it doesn't ring a bell, and it also sets off bullshit alarms.
Cool.
I would imagine that that would be more doable if my environmental requirements and operating constraints were a lot more slack.
Mm. So
So I just
my experience is that there are some relationships where it's like we don't really need like norms of like we're gonna do this or we're not gonna do this. We don't need strict agreements because we understand each other at a deep intuitive level and like we care about each other. And because we care about each other and because we trust each other, it's
Mhm.
easier to like operate from a more flowing place without so many structures. It's not my
No,
experience that that's true for all of my relationships, but it
yeah.
is my experience in some
So
of
I
them.
could see that being the case if it was like me and Matt went into a monastery and spent several years working together. We would just not talk, and I would buy that. But
Mhm.
like, I don't see how that operates with kids.
Totally.
Uh,
Again,
or like,
so
again,
my
this
thing
is
would be I could see it on an individual level, but like trying to scale it past that, I feel like
totally.
then it's too complicated at that point.
Which is why I really want to be clear. What I am talking about is not trying to scale it up. Not
Okay.
trying to scale this. I'm not trying to say let's eradicate all of our social structures. I'm saying I think it's a beautiful thing to aspire towards needing less of these rigid agreements and belief systems. Um, but an aspiration is different than like I'm trying to do it. It's just saying like I want more of my relationships to be in this place where we understand and we trust and we care about each other so deeply so that we don't need that. And I
I
think
think I'm going to guess that your understanding is encoded in a set of relationships that you don't have conscious access to. And what you're basically doing is trusting your biology to converge on an accurate model of reality, so long as the reality is sufficiently constrained. if you're in that same relationship with that same person long enough, I would believe that both of you develops a sufficiently accurate map of the other.
Yep.
And then if you're not being like, this is you and that's me, like
Yep.
here's our wedding ring.
Yes.
This is an aspiration, right? But this is a
Yeah.
Verbier script. And
Yep.
so it's aspirational.
Yep.
And like I'm seeing steps towards that.
Yep.
I think that's awesome.
Yes.
But I think the idea of like you're always going to have constraints. And if you're not able to be conscious about it, what happens is I think they slip into the unconscious and then become more tyrannical for it. And so well, maybe add a little bit more heat here because we're agreeing loudly, but we're talking about very abstract stuff. Let's try something a little more realistic, slightly contentious, but not too contentious.
Also, just naming, I think I want to wrap it up in about 5 minutes, 5 or
Okay.
10. Yeah.
We talked about immigration last time. I thought that went pretty okay. I felt like I added a lot more heat than I wanted to, and I'm grateful that you were able to keep it chill. So I appreciate that. You had some framing that I liked, and I want to like bounce it back to you, but think about it a bit more. You mentioned this idea of like the fact that somebody came into the country illegally doesn't seem like it's that relevant of a piece of information compared to what really matters, which is are they a symbiotic relationship with their environment, with the people around them, or not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I like that too, but if that works, why do that for immigration? Why not just do it for everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general we should orient towards like what is symbiotic, what is harmonious. Like I think orienting towards that in all of our things, like
Okay. But how
creating
do you,
healthy boundaries that help ensure. And this is where again I'm not saying no structure at all. I think
yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
structure is absolutely necessary. I don't
But
think
how do you
everything
know
needs to be
what,
bottom up. Some top down structures are absolutely vital to create the right context for the bottom up conditions to emerge.
so how do you know what is and is not parasitic? What kind of behavior is or does not count as actually parasitic?
I mean, I think it requires us looking at things holistically and doing so not just as individuals, but as groups of people, like
Yeah,
looking
but
at what's
how do
really
you make
benefiting the
that
whole.
how do you
What?
make that work for 300 million people? Like is it like every
It's
day we
really
look at all,
hard. I would say it's really hard to make that work for 300
but
million people,
is
which
it
is
even
why we're
computationally
struggling
because
so much in our country right now.
but is that even computationally feasible?
Is it to have like I mean it's what we're already doing. It's what we're that's how democracy works is like we are trying to make sense of things and we're like voting for people to represent our viewpoint because we think that like they're making sense of things in a way that makes sense to us and then we vote that at higher and higher scales and then we have like some group of people going and making sense of things and being like is this good, is this bad, and
Sound at
that's
all
what we're
All right,
doing right
here's,
now.
here's a question for you, Aaron. Would you be in favor of more federalization, I guess, of the states, where basically the states have more unique rights, or like basically instead of trying to get everyone all 300 million on or
Yeah,
half 150 million on one page, we try to
Yeah.
say, okay, I'm in Texas. We'll try to get over half of Texas on one page, at least.
Yeah. I mean I do think we need to return to a little bit more grassroots, like give, like let states self-govern a lot more, let cities
that
self-govern a lot
sounds like
more.
a much better approach because like
Yeah, there's going to be some balance. Like we need to make sure that we're not like getting such of this like individual focus that like the states become so disconnected from each other, because it's
I
like we
think
are
we're
such part of
already
one society. But I
disconnected
do
from
think we
each
need to
other.
orient towards that.
I
Like
think
I
we're
do
disconnected from each other because of the centralization.
a big part of yeah, I
That
think that's a big part of
if
it.
it wasn't like every 4 years, it feels like an existential crisis for half the country. Like, and that just keeps happening. Like, come on, that's not going to help anything. So,
Totally.
I think we all kind of like that model. It's good talking to you guys.
Yeah.
We should
Yeah, I'm gonna
go.
hop to another meeting. This is really
Let's
great. Yeah, I look forward
do it again.
to
Are you
more of this.
petting a
Thanks for
cat?
joining
I
us,
do
Matt.
this.
What was
Are
that,
you
Mark?
petting a cat? It looks like you're stroking a cat right there.
Who? Me?
Matt, you're
Matt?
sitting there.
Oh,
I can't see you. It looks like you got a cat on your lap. Like, yes, yes.
Oh no,
no.
that's want to get
Okay.
back.
Cool. Sweet.
All
Well,
right, great
yeah.
to see y'all.
Good
Yeah.
to see you. Bye.
See you. Bye.